All right. Wow, that's bright.
Woke you up, didn't it?
Yeah. All right. Tonight's talk, obsessive tendencies. I want to thank you all for being here, both in person and online. As always, my hope and my prayer is that from these educational workshops, we take something new, we learn something new, we help ourselves, but we help our community. That's my hope, is that we can take these things that we've learned, spread it to friends and family members, people who are unstuck, don't know why, don't know what to do, and we'll move forward on that. Tonight, I am going to be talking about obsessive tendencies, but one aspect that I'm going to bring up I have never talked about before. So this is actually a dietary aspect that can cause both diabetes, stiff person syndrome, autoimmune, as well as obsessive or OCD tendencies by eating one product. And it's a product that everybody loves to eat. So if you have a genetic predisposition, this one product can actually turn on this issue. So I'll be talking about that, as well as what we see happen in the body and the regions of the brain where we can see OCD or obsessive tendencies show up. So without any other questions, do you guys have any? We're going to jump right into that. So what we're going to look at is something called GAD65. So GAD65 is a specific enzyme. And this enzyme is really, really important. So the enzyme takes glutamine and changes it into the neurotransmitter GABA. So it's an enzyme, and the enzyme stands for glutamic acid decarboxylase. So if you just say GAD65, you're pretty good. So glutamic acid decarboxylase, and what it does is takes glutamine, which is a stimulatory neurotransmitter and a stimulatory substance, but glutamine is also what is given to people to help heal their gut. So if you have a leaky gut, glutamine can be a common product that's given to you. If you're somebody who is chronically needing excitation, glutamine can be given to you. But what happens is then there's this enzyme called GAD65, and its job is to take glutamine and change it into GABA. And if you don't know what GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. It's what helps you sleep, it's what helps you calm down, and it's stored in the brainstem. So GABA is the neurotransmitter that we use to actually help ourselves calm down. So if we're chronically go, can't shut down a brain, can't sleep, can't relax, we could be having an issue with this. Where this comes into play is your body can actually make an antibody to this enzyme. And if this enzyme doesn't happen, then we don't get GABA. And if we don't get GABA, then we can have OCD tendencies because we literally can't shut down our brain and it just gets spiked up. And then we have too much glutamine, which is a stimulatory thing. Does that make sense? So if we put it another way, if we have a dam and the dam lets out water all the time, that's what the enzyme does. If the water isn't let out, then it was build up, and that can cause bigger issues. We can start flooding areas and stuff, and that's what we can do with glutamine, is we can have an overproduction or an over amount of glutamine, and then we get excitatory and we're overreactive, and that's going to be somebody who can have OCD or obsessive issues. So we want to have this enzyme work correctly. So if you have GAD65 antibodies, then you don't make GABA. And then you can't actually have a brainstem that is calm. So this is one of the major things that can drive you to getting obsessive issues. This is why I ask people who come in and they have OCD or anxiety issues, this is why I'll ask them one question to see if we may have a predisposition to this. And the question is, do you have type 1 diabetes in your family? So we need to know that. If we have type 1 diabetes in our family, The side effect is that GAD65 enzyme is found in both the brainstem to make GABA, but it's also found in the pancreas to make insulin. So if that enzyme, if you have an antibody for it and you have type 1 diabetes in your family, that means you have a predisposition to OCD or anxiety issues because you don't have that enzyme working correctly. Isn't that crazy? Now, what is the food? You're not going to like it when I tell you. So I'll go over how it works, and then I'll show you what happens. So let's say this is the GAD65, and we're going to talk about protein now. So let's say this is the protein. So it's like AD, what is it? I forget. Let's say it's AD. And that's the GAD65. And then the protein that you can eat, which is casein, is A, D. And you can see how they match except for one. This is called molecular mimicry, which means proteins can be similar, but not exactly the same. And if your body makes an antibody to this protein, it can misinterpret it and attack that protein. So I'm actually showing you how you get type 1 diabetes, as well as how you can get OCD problems. In Canada, this is a well-known fact. And it took me literally going all the way through functional medicine to get reconfirmed what they taught us in Canada in undergrad. The protein that does this is dairy. Dairy. It's well known that if you are sick and you take dairy, you can literally induce type 1 diabetes. So if you're sick, your immune system is heightened. And if you take dairy when you're sick, your body can inadvertently make an antibody to this because it thinks it's a virus or a bacteria. And then because it looks almost exactly the same, see how they cross-link? Now start attacking that GAD65 or that glutamic acid decarboxylase enzyme. And then as a byproduct, you get type 1 diabetes. I know this firsthand because this is what happened to my grandfather. My grandfather was 12 years old, had a heavy fever. His mom gave him milk. And then 2 days, he got type 1 diabetes. So it's called molecular mimicry. It literally shows you how eating stuff can cross-react. We'll also see this. This is quite common, the molecular mimicry in Hashimoto's, and gluten will cross-react with it. But gluten, or the protein in wheat, will actually mimic dairy as well. So it's thyroid autoimmune. So if you have a thyroid autoimmune, what happens is your body, whenever it is exposed to, say, gluten or dairy, it will look exactly like thyroid. So let's say thyroid's up here, and thyroid looks like this. A, D, D, A. And so it overlaps in multiple places as well. And so what happens is proteins can cross-react. So if it overlaps like here, and it overlaps here, and here, and here. And how your body works is it will sample it, and it'll say, oh, that, we have an antibody for it. So it's literally a plug-in key, and it mixes, and it says that's foreign, and then it will attack it. Now with your thyroid, what happens is then when your thyroid gets destroyed, you'll have this flare, and you'll have a bunch of thyroid hormone come out. So then you'll become manic. And then when it stops being attacked, then it will drop, and then you can get depressed. Or it can be, you get really hot sweats when you're attacking yourself, and then you get cold when you're not. Because the thyroid determines how fast your body works. So literally, people who are Hashimoto's or an autoimmune for their thyroid, eating gluten or dairy can literally flare their autoimmune and cause them to attack themselves. Isn't that crazy?
So is this now well known in America?
This is well known in functional medicine, but if you talk to,
Not in general medicine.
no, not in general medicine, because in general medicine, if you have an autoimmune, the answer is steroids. And I go, well, that's nice. If you're eating a food that's cross-reacting, you're not fixing the problem. So another example, in functional medicine, we know there are foods that will cross-react with Hashimoto's, the case I was talking about. And then we can test for you and find cross-reactive foods that will attack your thyroid, even though they're not commonly found. And what they found with one of our clients, we found that watermelon will actually cause it. Potatoes would cause it. And what was the other one? Carrots, I believe. And Brussels sprouts. Things that you would not think. And that's just that person's cross-reactivity. So you'd be like, well, how could potatoes cause the problem? What it does is it literally flares and it cross-reacts like this, and then it causes more problems. So this is well known if you go to very progressive, what would it be called? Rheumatologist. But they'd have to be very progressive and on the cutting edge, because this journal stuff has only been published in the last 5 years. So it's not something that's commonly known. So the other fellow who did the journal work wanted to figure out diabetes, and he did a whole journal of cross-reactive foods that will cause type 1 diabetes. And dairy is one of the major causes, as well as gluten. So you go, well, you mean eating pizza can literally cause me to get diabetes? Yes, but not because you're fat, but because your body will actually cross-react and attack it and think it's a virus.
Or if you have type 2.
Type 2 diabetes is a whole different thing. Type 1 is autoimmune. Type 2 is inflammation. So type 2 is you have too much inflammation and you're shutting down how the body's working.
Can it flare arthritis?
So the answer is, can what flare arthritis?
If you eat gluten or dairy.
Yes, if you eat a product that will cause any inflammatory response anywhere in your body, it can flare it, yes. So a common flare product that we'll see with people is gluten, is dairy, is corn, and is soy. Those are the most reactive products people have. But then if you look at what's in your food, high fructose corn syrup, that's corn. And then you have gluten in almost everything. Like the craziest thing that I saw is like, if you know Hubba Bubba, like the bubble gum, the white stuff that they wrap it in is gluten. So literally, if you're allergic to
Like white film.
the white powder, that's gluten. Gluten's in almost everything. But you have to look like for the different stuff, like modified food starches and like different things. You have to look for it to figure out what it is.
But isn't one of the primary culprits, I guess, of inflammation sugar?
So the question is, isn't one of the primary culprits sugar? Yes. And it depends on what your immune system reacts to. So sugar will cause inflammation, but if your immune system flares, that's going to be different. The reason why sugar will cause it is because of an insulin spike. And then insulin, when it spikes, turns on a gene called NF alpha kappa beta. And that literally turns on a cytokine storm. So in simple terms, cytokine. So interleukin 1, interleukin 6, tumor necrosis factor. So it's like all inflammation. That's what inflammation is cytokines. So what happens is whenever you spike insulin, you turn on inflammation. That's what happens in your body because it turns on this gene. And this gene is found in every single part of our body. Every cell has it. So you spike insulin, that's what sugar does. Then you turn on inflammation, which is interleukin 6, interleukin 3, interleukin 5, and all that inflammation comes from that. But you can also have that turned on when you react to the environment. So your immune system, instead of insulin boosting it, your immune system says that's bad, and then it will flare that area as well. And then if you have cross-reactivity, where when you eat potatoes, it attacks your thyroid, then it will cause symptoms. Or if you have cross-reactivity, when you eat dairy, it destroys GAD65, and now you don't have enough GABA. Now you get OCD every time you eat dairy. And it can break it down and then lead to type 1 diabetes. Does it make sense? So basically, if you have type 1 diabetes in your family, it's probably best to stay away from dairy, unless you want to run the expensive test that I run. It's not that bad. It's like $600, but it's still a bunch of money to figure it out. It's better to try to stay away from dairy because it will literally spike it. But say you're somebody who is a different body type, like me. I'm an adrenal body type. If I eat dairy, it'll spike my blood sugar, which will then spike my insulin and turn on inflammation. If I eat a lot of fat, it will do it too. If I eat salt, it will do it too. So it doesn't have to be just that you're eating sugar. It literally can be adrenal body type, eat salty pretzel, blood sugar spikes, now I have inflammation. Make sense? So it's multiple factors. So that's why it's not as easy as saying, oh, well, you have type 2 diabetes, stop eating sugar, eat more protein. That literally can make it worse if you're an adrenal or gonadal body type, more of a substantial person. But if you're a thyroid person, more of a thin person, then it'll be good for you. So that's not why one size fit all doesn't work. You have to know what physiology is working with. So what we do with those people is we test their blood sugars and then see what food does to them. So you get a continuous glucose monitor, not because you have diabetes, because I want to see if eating salt spikes your blood sugar. Or if eating fruit doesn't do anything. And then you know what's actually happening. Because that'll cause the insulin response. All right, are we good?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So we went off topic a little bit, but it all is correlated, because if you have these next functions going on and you spike your blood sugar, it by itself can cause inflammation, which can cause you to feel anxious. Other things that will cause OCD or obsessive tendencies is chronically low oxygen levels in your brain. So that's why we look at your pulse oximeter. For brain health, you have to be at 97. Let me say that again. For brain health, you have to be at 97. I have multiple people who come in and their PCP tells them, as long as you're above 90, it's okay. Yes, that's for your body, not your brain. Your brain is a whole different ballgame. You need a lot of oxygen and a lot of sugar. Depending on the researcher, they'll say 60% of the energy in your body is used by your brain. 40 to 60, depends on what researcher you're talking about. And you need a lot of oxygen to take the power in the form of glucose and oxygen to make ATP, which is energy. So you need that. You also need blood sugars to be stable. I have quite a few people that will get OCD, anxiety, because their blood sugar drops too much. So we'll have people who come in, and this is a very missed or misdiagnosed issue, is hypoglycemia. And that's if your blood sugar is below 85. You don't pass out until it's below 55. So we have people who run chronically low, and what happens is when you're chronically low, remember the brain uses a lot of that energy? Guess where the OCD tendency comes from? 90% of it is frontal lobe. Guess what turns off if you have low blood sugar? Your frontal lobe. Low oxygen, your frontal lobe. You're going into fight or flight. So now that part of the brain, the executive center, is not able to work correctly. It will stop working slow, so you're stable, and will speed up, and then you get OCD. So if you don't have enough oxygen, you don't have enough sugar, you can get OCD because of that. We commonly see it in the thin lady, the really thin in shape lady, or the fellow who looks like he has a triangle where his shoulders are wide and his waist is smaller. Those are thyroid body types. And they run chronically low in blood sugar, and that's why they're more prone to OCD. So their blood sugars are chronically low, frontal lobe turns off, then we get issues. So if we look at the actual brain, what happens is at FZ, which is the frontal part of your brain right here in the middle, your high beta over beta, which is beta is 13 to 25. High beta is 26 to 39. So this is the hertz. So 13 to 25, that's going to be low beta. High beta is 26 to 39. When you look at this and you take this and divide it, if that number comes out to be above 0.55, that tells me we're prone to OCD. It just means your brain's running faster than it should be. And if we look at it in a different way, low beta is thinking a little bit of stress, but you can let things go. High beta is you're freaking out. So the brain's running really, really, really quick. You're in fight flight mode. I know in the beginning I told you beta is bad and all of it's bad, but it's not that simple. Depending on the researcher, they split it up between 2 and 4 sections. I like 2 to make it really easy. But when you look at beta, if you have high beta, it's okay. That's when you're in the thinking, producing, go, go, go mode. Or that's low beta, I mean. High beta is the, oh my gosh, everything's going to end. Cortisol spiking, going crazy. Now, what's another effect of cortisol spiking? I don't know if I taught you guys this. Do you know the original name of cortisol was glucocorticoid? So that means every time you're given a cortisol shot, your blood sugar goes up. So if you run this enough, you can actually push problems by giving cortisol. Because tumors like sugar. So it'll decrease inflammation, but now it can drive a tumor formation. And it will cause you to liberate glycogen into glucose. That means you make more sugar. So every time you get cortisol, you make more sugar. Your body's smart, though. It goes, if I'm stressed, I'm going to make a hormone that will give me more sugar and make me not hurt. It's called cortisol. But we're not supposed to have high levels chronically. And when you get an injection, you get chronically high levels. And that's why your blood sugars will go off when you get chronic cortisol. And that's why the people get puffy as well, because the sugars are too high. So this can induce diabetes. And we've seen this with certain patients when they've had chronic pain, and then they get diabetes because now their sugars are too high for too long. Is it making sense? So to go back to this, we want you to have basically half as much high beta to beta, and then you're okay. You let things go. With the higher that is, the more stressed out your brain is. Now, what we'll commonly see, though, is when we look at the brain, the back of the brain here, the occipital lobe, this is where the monkey brain, for lack of a better term, or the squirrel brain comes from. So this is where the, well, what about that? 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 The always thinking in the future. This is where you can get obsessive or anxiety problems because the back of your brain is running too fast. And when we check people, this is where their beta is too much. They'll have double beta to theta. So that's the O1 part of the brain. And when we find that, it usually correlates to the front of the brain being too fast as well. And what we've seen this is a protective mechanism. Somewhere in your life you were hurt and you want to be aware of everything and then control so you feel safe. So I commonly find this in females. And what it is think. Okay, that's one thing I got to get done. And then obsess about it, take care of it, feel calm for 30 seconds to a minute. And then the next thing comes in and then go. And they'll burn themselves out this way because they don't have enough time to relax and actually heal themselves. Make sense? So what we found is really cool. This training the back of the brain, when we were doing it with just neurofeedback, could take 40 to 60 sessions. And that's fast compared to standard. With the laser, we can literally train it with the laser, and we see people shoot up within 1 to 2 visits, start getting into the normal ranges and feeling very calm right away because we're putting in energy. It's funny. God must have done this to make my life easier or everybody's life easier, because this is actually the thinnest part of the skull and you can fully saturate it with energy in 30 seconds. But it's the hardest part of the brain to train. So if you use laser, you can literally fully saturate it and get it to train very quickly.
So, in assessing all that initially, when you see someone, is this with blood work or?
So what the question is, assessing all this is the EEG.
Okay,
If we're looking at the first bit that I brought in, the assessment, that is going to be questions and then figuring out if their problem gets worse when they eat dairy.
but your EEG can determine all that?
The EEG will show me the back of the brain, the theta beta ratio, the front of the brain, the high-low beta ratio. And then when we add them together, it will tell me if the middle part of the brain, the limbic or the emotional center, is too hot as well. So the EEG will literally tell me all of that. It'll tell me you have this form that looks like OCD, but you actually don't have it. And this is why the people, the back of the brain, this is where the self-medicating stuff comes from. This is where the food, the drugs, the sex, the TV, whatever it is, the chronically having to scroll on your phone, I don't know. Don't need to know, but that's where it comes from. This is the genetic predisposition. This frontal lobe, though, this is always trauma. The frontal lobe, the OCD stuff, is always a trauma marker. We always go back and we'll find some sort of trauma. It's usually an emotional, can be a physical, but usually a major trauma has happened, and it's a protective mechanism to never let that happen again. We'll also see it, though, show up in children who are spectral. So if they're on the spectrum, we'll see it show up, because what happens is when the brain is on fire, and this is what we find with spectral kids, there's inflammation from either heavy metals that could come in the food of food or the jab or different things like that, or there's a head trauma, or there's chronic emotional stress, or there's food. There's multiple things that can cause inflammation. I don't know what it is, but we want to put out the inflammation. And the end stage of neurodevelopment is left frontal lobe development. So what they'll do is they'll actually jump to left frontal lobe development, and they'll become OCD to try to control the environment because they can't control the internal. And so we'll actually see them, they have to line up their cars because they can't feel safe inside themselves. So the external cars or the door, whatever it is their calming routine. So it actually makes them feel calm because they can't control how they feel, but they can control this because their frontal lobe doesn't work. And then if they have the developmental issue where the OCD is big, they usually don't have processing tools. So they usually don't have gross motor, and that's why they're kind of floppy. They might have fine motor, maybe auditory, but frontal lobe is usually not there. So the executive visualization isn't there. So they'll use the hand movements to calm themselves, and that's why you'll see them twiddling or tapping, and depending on what one they use tells you how they are stimming themselves. So if they're always moving, they're stimming themselves through gross motor to turn off the OCD, to turn off the anxious feelings. If they're twiddling, fine motor. If they're humming all the time or screaming, auditory. If they're chronically reading, then it's frontal lobe. But they'll have jumped steps. And that's why we see them stuck where they are. So we use the brain test to see where they are. Every kid that I've seen that has true developmental issues, their frontal lobe is hot. It's off the charts. So when your brain is inflamed, you produce more of everything. So the frontal lobe, your alpha, theta, and beta, total summation should be at 60. If they have autism, they're in the thousands. And that's because of all the inflammation that's going on. The middle of their brain, same thing. Summation should be 60, and we'll see them in the 2,000 to 3,000. And that's because of the inflammation. So you got to put out the inflammation. And there's usually comorbidities, like they have a liver problem where they have, like, say, an MTHFR, so their liver won't use B vitamins to get rid of toxins correctly. They're always glutathione deficient, so they can't get rid of toxins. So you give a normal kid a Skittle and they have enough glutathione and B vitamins to get rid of it. You give the kid that has developmental issues to it and they can't, and now it becomes a neurotoxin for them. So that's what you run into. So when it's hard, because you're like, we'll have parents and they're like, Grandma, you can't give the kid these Skittles because it'll literally make them go crazy for 3 days because it's a neurotoxin. And it's literally because what's happening is they can't metabolize it out. But if they can, they're just sugared up for a little bit, but because of the inflammation. Does that make sense? So you have to figure out what you're dealing with. But if it's the kid who has that, they always have underlying liver issues and digestive tract issues, and now they're going to have all the issues. And say they have that GAD65 antibody. Now they don't have GABA. So you give them, let's say, ice cream, and now they have sugar that'll spike it, as well as they don't make that enzyme, so now they don't make GABA, but now they have stimulatory glutamine, so now they're amped up, they can't calm down, and they obsess about stuff, and they don't have processing techniques, so that you see all this stuff pile up. And then you'll see, well, why won't they let go? Because they literally, you giving them ice cream is like having somebody snorting a bunch of cocaine, that's why. And so they're just amped up. Does that make sense? So then what you want to do is you want to get in there and figure out how to pull the inflammation down, and then you watch the child stabilize. We can use laser to pull it down. We can use diet to pull it down. We can use the adjustment to stimulate the frontal lobe. So we had people asking, well, what does the adjustment do? It actually stimulates the frontal lobe and makes new connections and stimulates the cerebellum. The frontal lobe being on will then down-regulate the stress response. The cerebellum will now make the muscles work correctly. And as we do that more and more and more, it stabilizes. And because the neurons only need 1 to 2 hours to actually stabilize, if they're reactive, if they're stable enough, they can actually train really well. So like with really sick people, I'll see them 4 times a day. But then we'll watch major stress, inflammation issues go away. So like we had one lady who had pandas, which is an a dysfunction where the immune system won't work correctly and had a chronic infection. And literally stimulating the frontal lobe then made her immune system turn on, and then she could kill off that chronic bacterial infection. As a side effect of that, she was on antibiotics ever since she was 2. And she was 17 when she came in. But we saw her 2 to 3 times a day for like 3 months and literally rebooted the immune system, and then she was able to heal. And that's with the adjustments, the neuro and all that stuff. So what I want you to see is there are food components, there are neurological components, and you just have to figure out what's driving the inflammation. If you're somebody who has type 1 diabetes in your family, it's probably just best to stay away from dairy and not eat it every day. Maybe once in a while it's fine, but try not to do that. Once I found this out, because my grandfather has type 1, I know dairy is not the best thing for me. I might eat it every once in a while, but I'm not going to eat it every day because I'm putting myself at a higher risk for turning on that OCD and type 1 diabetes, because I know that genetic susceptibility is in my family for that GAD65 issue. Does that make sense? So do we have any questions? So simplistically, OCD or obsessive issues are not a one-size-fit-all thing. If we have low GABA, we got to figure out, is it an enzyme issue? Then you got to take the pill. Is it inflammation that's causing it? Because then I didn't even get into this. The vagus nerve is the thing that actually allows the neurotransmitters to go to the brain. So if you don't have the gag reflex, you don't have the vagus nerve working, you don't have the neurotransmitters. So you could have OCD or anxiety because your gut's sick, or because you're inflamed, or because you eat too much sugar, or because you had a head injury. So that's why the history is really important, is to see what are we dealing with here. Oh, you don't have a gag reflex, you're eating a lot of dairy and gluten. Okay, that's a pretty straightforward case. But we fix a bunch of stuff and we're still hitting walls. Then we start doing blood tests to figure out if you have an antibody or something else going on. So if you have a friend or family member and they're like, well, I have OCD and the drug hasn't worked for me, it's probably because of something I just told you. If you're taking a pharmaceutical and you still have anxiety, it means you have a problem probably making the GABA, or you have a problem with their gut health or with the vagal function or something else. So we can help them. We just got to ask different questions. It's not, you have anxiety, how we make or obsession issues, how do we make it go away? It's what's causing you to have it? What's the upstream effect? Where do you step in to help you go forward from there? And that's where we'd like to go. So that's why I like going, because then we can actually help the person. And it could be as simple as, if you don't eat gluten, your anxiety goes away. We've had lots of people that have had those things, because it literally triggers inflammation, and that's where they get the problem. So I wish it was simple, but it isn't. It's pretty complex, but we know if we look at multiple steps, we'll finally figure out what it is. So it's not that you're a weird case, it's that nobody's asked the right question. There's always an answer. It's just you got to ask the right question. And if you've exhausted one field of, let's say, medicine or health, then we got to look at a different field. And that's what I usually recommend for people. So it's like, well, I keep hitting my ham with a hammer. I don't understand why it's hurting. Well, let's stop using a hammer and use something else. So let's stop giving a drug or a surgery and let's do something else. That make sense? So if you have a friend or a family member, there is hope. We can look and we can see if it's something we can help them with. And usually we do find the answer. I want to thank you all for being here and take away that there are answers. We just have to figure out what it is. So you guys have a blessed night.